Okay, we are good to go.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our regular council meeting and committee of adjustment meeting for Monday, December the 9th. As you will notice, we have moved from our regular in-person meeting format to a virtual format tonight due to the ongoing freezing rain advisory that's out. Some of our staff don't live in town, so we wanted to make sure that everybody got home safely and remained safe throughout the evening. Before we get to our regular meeting agenda, we do have a committee of adjustment meeting. So we will call the committee of adjustment meeting to order at 6:31. We do have quorum. So tonight we have a public meeting which is being held under Section 45 of the Planning Act to consider a minor variance application. Minor variance application A24-03 is for the property located at 716 and 722 Main Street East in the town of Shelburne. The purpose of the application is to request relief from zoning bylaw number 38-2007 to permit a minimum of 42 parking spaces, to permit a reduction to the minimum parking aisle width from 7 meters to 6 meters, to permit a planting strip of 2.3 meters, and to permit a reduction to the minimum landscaped open space requirement of 9% rather than the required 15%. I will now ask the clerk for the method of notice for tonight's public meeting.
Notice of tonight's public meeting was advertised on local media sources, and property owners within a 60-meter radius have received notification.
Thank you. So we're joined by Steve Weaver, our planner, who will walk us through a presentation with a summary of the written comments that have been received to date. Following that presentation, there'll be an opportunity for the committee members as well as members of the public who have joined us to ask questions and provide comments. So with that, Steve, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Mills. I have a few slides that I've put together to assist with presenting this application. And also joining us tonight, we have Bruce McCall Richmond, who is planner for the owners of the property, and Dale Downey, who's representing the ownership group. Give me one moment while oh, thank you, Alice. I don't know if you can put it in presentation mode. Perfect. So as mentioned by the chair, the application is A2403 for 716 and 722 Main Street East. And the purpose of tonight's meeting is a public meeting, and subject to public comments, there is a recommendation for consideration by the committee as well. Next slide, please. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the location, very visible commercial location that has historically been used for a Pete's Donut shop on the easterly property and a home sales center on the westerly property. Those two properties that you see outlined in red have actually merged into one combined property. The entire property is being proposed under one site plan application, and these minor variances that are in front of you tonight came about through the review of the site plan application that's been in process over the course of the last several months. I think importantly, in terms of the location context, you can see again, this is a commercial location. The property to the north is commercially zoned and is used for a gym and retail use, and was originally a car dealership. And to the west is a medical use and former insurance office years ago. Again, commercially zoned. I think you're familiar, of course, with the plazas to the east, the L-shaped property, which is Wrigglesworth Plaza, and the gas station property inside of that. And then, of course, further east of that is the new plaza at the Emerald Crossing development. To the southeast is the No Frills development, and we have just recently received a site plan application for some expansion there as well. And to the south is a vacant commercial property at the southwest corner. Another important contextual item here is that the roads that provide access to this site and many of the sites in the area are not directly controlled by the town. So on the east side of this property, you can see there's an existing driveway access on County Road 124. And there is a shared mutual driveway on the north side of Main Street East, which is Highway 1089, controlled by the province by Ministry of Transportation. Next slide, please. So this is the site plan that's currently under review. It isn't final yet at this point, but this is the second submission. There are still some items that have been provided to the applicants in terms of comments that are being worked through, as well as the MTO review. The entire site is subject to requirements for MTO access, building, and land use permits, as well as MTO sign permits. You can see notably at the south end of the site plan, a fairly large area that is shown in green is within the property boundary, but is required by the MTO as a highway setback. And that setback is one of the key reasons why these variances are requested. It is a requirement of the MTO, and as a result, there is less space to achieve parking, circulation. The area within that zone does not count towards the minimum landscaped open space area and the planting strip requirements. So the reason for that setback is that MTO protects either side of their highways when new development comes about in case of a future widening. And there are no planned widenings of the highway in this location. It is also not in the known or foreseeable future as to when and if the right-of-way might be widened. But nevertheless, MTO does require that building and land use setback. These same setbacks were applied to other commercial developments, including the Summerhill Plaza at the north end and the Emerald Crossing commercial development to the east, as well as the No Frill development to the southeast. But other sites, such as the Wrigglesworth Plaza and the gas station across the road, those standards didn't exist at the time those were built. So that's why you see some buildings and other elements of those properties closer to the highway. I think importantly as well for tonight's presentation is just to note the green areas within the site. Those are the areas where there would be a permeable surface cover, combination of grass and trees and other plantings. There's a more detailed landscape plan as part of the site plan submission. Just as a quick overview of the layout of the site, so you can see there are two drive-through restaurants proposed. The Easterly building, which is roughly where the former Pete's Donuts is, but this is a new building, is proposed as a KFC restaurant with a drive-through around the north end. And then the Westerly building is two main units, one for a Taco Bell restaurant with a longer drive-through aisle wrapping around the east, north, and west sides of the building. And adjoining that is building A for retail uses. And the specific number of uses and retail tenants haven't been determined yet for that. Next slide, please. So there are 5 variances that are requested. The first 4 are fully discussed in our report. The minimum number of parking spaces required based on the floor areas is 46, but as mentioned, due to some of the setback requirements, they've maxed out the parking area and only been able to accommodate 42 with the site design. The driveway or parking aisle width is required by the bylaw to be 7 meters wide for two-way traffic, but there are 2 locations, again, that are constrained on site that are less than 7 meters, and I'll show those in a moment. Planting strip is required between the parking area and County Road 124, and the bylaw requires 3 meters. A small section of that planting strip is proposed at 2.3 meters, again, relative to access constraints. The total landscaped open space is a function of the MTO setback as well, because MTO has requested that anything that's required to satisfy the zoning requirements should not be dealt with in the 14-meter setback area. The reason for that, again, is if that widening of the highway is taken in the future, they don't want to put the property out of compliance with the zoning bylaw by virtue of a highway widening. So a reduction in the landscaped open space is requested from 15 to 9%. And then at the time we wrote our report and when the application was filed, some details around the retaining wall had not yet been solidified. Through further review of the site plan and discussion with the applicant, it has been confirmed that a variance is needed there. Normally, retaining walls are not a zoning concern as long as they're 1 meter or less in height. They can be right up to the property line, subject to grading and other requirements being met. In this case, there are parts of the retaining wall to accommodate the drive-through on the north side of the property, where the height would be greater than 1 meter up to 1.5 meters in height. And normally the setback requirement for that would be 3 meters under the zoning bylaw, and they're requesting to put that retaining wall right along the lot line of the north property boundary. And next slide. So just to detail the parking a little bit more, you can see the parking areas have been consolidated into the south and easterly parts of the property. So majority of the parking will be in front of the two buildings along Highway 89, and a smaller row of 3 parking spaces on the east side of the property. We did do a careful review of the number of parking spaces proposed. A couple of key considerations with that. One, the applicant did a survey of similar sites in Orangeville and in other municipalities, and also considered the existing plaza at the north end of Shelburne, the Summerhill Plaza. In those cases, the parking ratio provided was the same or fewer parking spaces provided for similar uses, and they are functioning fine. So the work that they did recorded maximum parking use, number of spaces provided per floor area, and it does demonstrate that 42 spaces is adequate for the proposed uses based on those precedents. That's equivalent to a ratio of 1 space per 18.5 square meters of gross floor area. And Summerhill Plaza, as an example, was 1 space per 17.5 square meters and went through a similar variance process. Another consideration relative to that is the nature of the uses with the drive-through pickup option does mitigate some of the parking requirements. Number of employees, of course, is another consideration, and that's not expected to be a high number that would require any more than, say, a quarter of the parking spaces for staff. With the food takeout, delivery, and drive-through focus, that certainly limits the in-restaurant dining, and even for the in-restaurant dining, the turnover time in these types of restaurants is usually quite quick. So we were generally satisfied with the parking proposal here. There may be some minor fine tuning as we go through the balance of the site plan process, but that's the overview of the review of the parking variance. And next slide, please. The next one is the driveway or parking aisle width. For the most part, the aisle width meets the 7 meters, so across the front of the main building on the west side, but there is that pinch point because you can see the property gets narrower as you move from west to east, and the 14-meter setback condenses that. And as a result, the space between the parking in front of the proposed KFC building is 6.12 meters, which is still wide enough for two-way traffic. And the driveway, where there are no parking spaces on the southeast corner of the building, it's just the blow up in the top right-hand side of the slide, is 6 meters. A little bit more information on that in the following slides, and we can move through them fairly quickly. You can go to the next slide. So the key consideration with all of this is, can the largest vehicles that will be traveling through and onto the site or potentially have to travel through or onto the site have adequate access? One of the key considerations is that the minimum fire route width under the Ontario Building Code is 6 meters, and they are still providing that. And to further demonstrate that the 6 meters is adequate, they did a vehicle maneuvering analysis. And so this diagram and the next one illustrate the turning movements for fire trucks. Does not necessarily mean that this is the route that a fire truck would take. It may more likely come from the west where the fire station is along Highway 89, turn left into the site, and it would still be accommodated through the site via the fire lane. But this is to demonstrate that some of the more challenging or narrower movements can still accommodate a fire vehicle. And the next slide shows again, different routing for the fire truck, and it's accommodated through the proposed parking aisles and driveways. And the next slide shows the same information for waste pickup. And there's a centralized waste enclosure where the waste vehicles would pick up the waste through private collection. So this would not be a county service, but a private collection on site. And the next slide shows a different route again for the waste vehicle. Next slide shows deliveries. So in that central area again, that would dual function as a loading space for any deliveries for the retail and restaurant uses on site, and no problems in terms of accommodating the delivery vehicle turning movements. Next slide shows the same with a different route. And then the last two turning movement diagrams just illustrate that there's adequate space for standard passenger vehicles moving in both directions. The next slide. So it just covers all the different turning movements that may be considered and proves that there are no constraints with the narrower driveway and parking aisle widths. There is one comment with respect to one pinch point in the southeast corner that we're still working through the site plan process, but it's not expected to alter the variance requirements at all. And that comment stems from the engineering review where it was flagged that if a delivery or waste vehicle is coming into the site at the same time as a passenger vehicle is trying to go through that space, which is hopefully a fairly unlikely scenario, and one vehicle would hopefully wait for the other, there is a bit of a pinch point. So that may affect the curbing design a little bit in one part of the site, but doesn't affect the variance. Next slide. So the next part of the variance is similar to variance that were granted by the committee for other sites. An example is the dental office that's being constructed at 4070 and Sound Street, where again, due to parking design and aisle width requirements, there was a pinch point in the landscape strip. Most of the planting strip along County Road 124, that green area you see on the diagram here, will meet the 3-meter minimum requirement, but there is that narrowing part to accommodate the driveway and aisle. The other reason for the whole design as you see it is to ensure that it's barrier-free accessible. So you can see within the county right-of-way, crossing through the area labeled as right-in, right-out access, a sidewalk will be added as part of this development on the west side of County Road 124, connecting to the intersection at Highway 89, and a walkway from that sidewalk into the site will accommodate pedestrians coming through the planting strip area. And there are curb depressions on either end of that where it crosses the curbs, so that and those are sloped in a way to ensure it's accessible for wheelchairs and strollers and so forth. So the reason that that part is narrower in terms of the aisle and the planting strip is to make sure that the barrier-free accessible design is accommodated. And next slide. The overall landscaping of the site area, when you include the 14-meter setback, is closer to 30% of the area. But again, because of that potential future highway widening, MTO doesn't want that 14-meter setback area relied upon for future landscape requirements. So if that entire 14-meter area were removed in the future for non-landscaping purposes, and again, I don't think that's a very likely possibility, the net landscaping on the remainder of the site would be 9% of the site area, which is reasonable considering how much land is lost for the setback area. So overall, the landscape plan is robust and adequate for this site from the review of the related site plan application. And next slide. On the north end of the property, this is the variance that wasn't covered in my report as the retaining wall details were still being sorted out. You can see the red line is where a continuous retaining wall of varying height would be constructed to make sure that adequate flat space is available on the north side for the 2 drive-through lanes. The retaining wall at its highest parts would be about 1.5 meters. Again, that detail is being confirmed through the grading plan and other information as part of the site plan process. But because it exceeds a meter in height, the zoning would normally require that it meet the side yard setback of the zone, which is 3 meters in the C3 zone. In this case, the variance request is to allow that retaining wall to be right along the lot line. We have considered the impact of that, and really there is no significant impact that we can see, because the 6 meters immediately to the north of that retaining wall is an existing municipal sanitary sewer easement where no buildings or structures can go anyway. And then the buildings on the property to the north are quite far north of that retaining wall. And as I mentioned, wouldn't be able to build in the sewer easement area anyway. So that area is just open land for the sewer and drainage at this point. So we're not expecting any significant impacts. This would be very similar to what you see on the north side of Wrigglesworth Plaza, where there's also a retaining wall there to accommodate that drive-through. On top of the retaining wall would be what is referred to as a guard wall. It's basically a nicer looking masonry guardrail or to function as a guardrail to prevent any vehicles from accidentally slipping out of the drive-through lane down the slope. Next slide. So I think that covers a quick overview. There's a lot more information, as you can see in the volume of information in my report. And there's a lot of attachments there and further information that was provided through the site plan process. Before I go over the conditions, I did want to mention that we received some public comments as well. And I'm not sure if those have been circulated to the committee, but just quickly to provide an overview of that, those comments were received on December 6th from Randa James. And there were some questions there about, one, why is it referred to as the approved site plan in the first condition? And the answer to that is the site plan is still under review, so we're suggesting some minor rewording of that condition just to say that all of this shall be in conformance with an approved site plan, or that a site plan approval is required in conjunction with this. Basically, the site plan and minor variance go hand in hand, and the site plan provides more details to demonstrate how the variance, if approved, would be met. There's also a typo that the member of the public had flagged where it indicates a parking rate of 1 space per 19 square meters, but the actual ratio is 1 space per 18.5 square meters, and that's the variance that's been requested as summarized in our report. There was a question about why no planting strips are identified or referenced in the variance on the west and north property boundary. And the answer to that is because those sites are zoned commercial, there are no planting strip requirements under the zoning bylaw adjacent to those sites, only to the lot lines adjoining public roads, and there are no lot lines that adjoin any residential zones. So that's the reason for that. There was also a comment or question. You'll see the site plan that was submitted with our report did not shade all of the landscape areas as green. So that's been fixed now. And you can see, again, I can refer back to it in the presentation if you wish. All of the proposed landscape areas have now been shaded in green. And lastly, there were some questions about the retaining wall and why some of the details of that. For example, there's a detail in the landscape plans and the grading plan through the site plan review was not included in this report. Those documents were not submitted as part of the minor variance, but we can share them with the committee, and if the applicant consents, we can share them publicly if needed. Staff have reviewed those in detail, and as I mentioned, we're still confirming some of the exact details of the retaining wall. The purpose of the variance is really just to allow it to be up to 1.5 meters in height. And so we didn't want any confusion to be created with that because the grading plan needs some updates to reflect that. So I think that summarized what I wanted to present. Again, the conditions of approval here, slightly different and reworded from what is in my report, covers the limitations of the variance, just to make sure that it's specific to this site plan approval, the uses that are proposed on this site, the parking ratio that's proposed for those uses, And it isn't a perpetual thing that could be applied to any future redevelopment. It's just exactly for this site plan approval. So with that, I'll pause there and would welcome any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Questions from committee members? Len.
Thank you, Mayor. Steve, I've got just a question about the traffic flow. Similar to what happens at the corner of Main Street and Greenwood, what is to prevent vehicles from coming south on 124 and using that parking lot as a shortcut to go west on 89? And what impact does that have on the two exits for the restaurants? And what if a KFC customer comes into the drive-through and wants to continue west at a similar time when a Taco Bell customer is coming to the drive-through and wanting to travel north on 124? Does it not make, could we not eliminate those 4 parking spaces at the exits of both of those drive-throughs to give more room to make those turns should they be required? Or are there going to be, like, is it going to be a one-way flow, or?
No, it'll, through the chair to the member, it'll be 2 ways throughout the main parking aisles and driveways. I think related to your question, the county has flagged that, consistent with the Shelburne East Area Transportation Studies, the driveway, which is currently full moves on County Road 124, will have to be designed for right-in, right-out access only. So what that will mean is that cars will not be sitting at that driveway waiting to turn left to go north on 124, which will help to keep the traffic moving in and out of that driveway.
Right.
The number of queuing spaces for these types of restaurants is quite a bit more than I think we would typically see for them, which is good, and it's illustrated the number of cars that can fit, but the likelihood that, either or both of these drive-throughs is going to have that many, cars in it on an ongoing basis, or to a point where it could back up into the driveways, I think is pretty remote. There are ways to get, this is a difficult corner. I'm sure you've all experienced that, but there are ways to get in all the directions you might need to go in and out of this plaza. So for example, if you want to exit the plaza on 124 and head eastbound on Highway 89, instead of, turning left out of onto Highway 89, right out of the plaza, you could turn right, get into the left turn lane and turn left on 89. There will still be a full move access on Highway 89, which I'm sure at times of the day will be tricky coming in and out, but that will allow at least one of the driveways to continue to service all movements.
Okay.
So I don't know if I've answered your question, but suffice it to say, all of the routes in the main parking area and between the 2 driveways, the one on 124 and the one on Highway 89, those will all be wide enough for 2-way traffic.
Okay. All right. I'm just thinking in terms of, the Tim Hortons. If you're coming out of the Tim Hortons drive-through and people are trying to get into, just park in front of the Tim Hortons for a walk-in service, that's a pretty tight turn, especially if you have someone with a pickup truck or a larger SUV. I'm just thinking of, yes, in a perfect world, all the drivers will be courteous and everything will be according to Hoyle, but there will be exceptions to that rule always. So I'm just wondering if even short car parking, like short vehicles only, small vehicles only parking for certain areas in that area to maybe facilitate that. I don't know. I'm not the planner. It just looks like it's pretty tight coming out of both of those drive-through exits. And then, like I said, there's always going to be that individual who's going to want to not wait for the light and go west on 89 by coming south down 124 and trying to shortcut through that parking lot. So that's my only concern there. I mean, as far as the green space is concerned, I'm not so concerned about the other parts of it. I'm just looking at that as being a very tight parking space with those two exits where they are, and if there's some way of maybe exiting sooner, cutting a corner, you know what I mean? Like,
And
that would be a concern.
through you, Chair Mills, to Committee Member Guichardi. So is the question whether those 3 spaces to the east of the KFC, whether those should be there or not? Because I think you've rightly pointed out, they may not be the ideal spaces in the lot, in that people coming into and going out onto 124, people trying to move in and out of those spaces may have a harder time than some of the other spaces. But just to confirm that those spaces are beside the entrance into the drive-through, not the exit. So
right.
So people would enter the drive-through on the far northeast corner, and they would exit the drive-through in the kind of more the middle of the site.
Right. I don't know if I've got, is it where those, I believe there was a number 3 beside those 4 spaces. There were 2 handicap spaces and I think 2 regular spaces there, or 3 regular spaces there.
Maybe I could quickly screen share.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Put that back up. It might be easier.
I think I can do it myself here, Alice. Let me give it a try. Did that come up?
Yep. Okay, so section 4. I mean, 3 isn't bad, but area 4 is where I'm going to see, you know, you've got traffic going, potentially traffic going east through the parking lot to go north on 124. You've got traffic potentially coming 124 south, cutting through the parking lot to continue west on 89. And then you've got those 4 parking spaces that are going to be difficult to back out, especially for accessible vehicles. So I'm wondering if moving those 2 accessible spaces to where the number 3 is on the east side of the parking space. Thank you for pointing your cursor. Yeah. So why don't you make all 3 of those accessible, and make the section of 4 for small vehicles only? Because
I see what you're getting at there. So a couple of considerations there. So one, with respect to avoiding, shortcutting through, there are no specific measures that have been identified. That's not to say that couldn't be considered through the site plan process. That's something we'll take back and ultimately wouldn't affect the variance. It's something we can take back to see if there are ways to do that. And there are a couple of things that would hopefully discourage people from doing that. One would be, crossing 2 pedestrian walkways, at least 2, plus any pedestrians, coming in and out of the buildings from the parking area. The general volume of cars moving through this site, what might hopefully discourage, like to actually visit the site and park, would hopefully discourage some people from doing that. Other than that, I mean, there are no physical measures that have been identified, such as speed bumps or something like that. But that is something that could be added at any time. Definitely the operators and the tenants wouldn't want to see that happening frequently. So those types of measures sometimes have to be added if that becomes a problem.
right.
I think with respect to the accessible spaces, you can see the dark arrow here. That's where the main entrance into the building would be. And the general design for accessible spaces and AODA guidelines would suggest it should be the spaces closest to the door,
Right.
so that anyone who needs mobility assistance or has some limitations there could access that more easily. I do think that maybe the 3 spaces on the east side might be as or more challenging than perhaps the 4 here, because you have the movement behind those spaces with respect to the in and out at the driveway. Whereas by the time you're in here, people have had time to get into the site and navigate their way, as opposed to the rush of trying to get in off County Road and into the site and find a place to park.
Okay.
Hard to say what would be ideal there, but those are some of the considerations that led to the location of the barrier-free spaces.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Thanks, Steve.
And just to that point, Steve, there's only one area where that aisle width is actually reduced to the 6 meters, right? And it's sort of over on the far east side.
Yeah. So right
Yeah.
here, this space, this is where I was trying. I mean, maybe you didn't describe it very well, but with the accessible ramps coming through here, you need enough slope to make this, not too steep on either end. And so that was really the pinch point here, that made this 6 meters instead of 7. But again, there's no parking spaces being accessed from that general corridor. So 6 meters is, again, that's the fire route standard. It's plenty wide enough for two-way vehicles. The other was just in here, and that part is 6.12, and that's a function of, the property gets narrower as you go east.
Right.
And they're trying to provide, these types of tenants, national brands, have very specific store templates. You'd think, well, why don't you just make the building a bit smaller, make the sidewalks a bit smaller? All of that kind of comes as a package, because they're trying to make it fit with their design standards and make it so that there's adequate pedestrian space as you come into or exit the building, that you're not stepping right out into a parking space or having cars parked right up against the edge of the building, that kind of thing.
Okay, thanks. Member Bonato.
I have a couple of questions. The first question's on the accessible walkway in. That's because of the MTO setback not allowing it on the Highway 89 to go in towards that, because that would be a lot shorter for wheelchairs than coming off 124. So I'm assuming that's the reason for it being on 124?
Through the chair. That's partly right. If it were to come in off the highway sidewalk, so Highway 89, it would be quite a bit longer. I mean, it depends where people are coming from, I suppose. But the other consideration was the whole intent of the building setback is that anything that's kind of the only one of its kind or essential to the site functioning, MTO doesn't want it in that setback zone. So if your barrier-free access is in that setback zone and then they come and widen the highway and have to remove it, that creates a potential future problem. So it is part of the rationale for having it on the east side. I think the other intent was, we see this as kind of a node. I don't know how many people will, park over here, access some of the buildings, go across the road to the Tim Hortons Plaza, go to the southeast to the No Frills. But as highway oriented as it is, providing as much pedestrian and accessible facility as possible, the idea was to keep that close to the corner, because that's more likely where people are going to be circulating. That was part of the thought process.
Okay, and my second question is regarding the Taco Bell delivery. You said the delivery is in between the KFC building B and building, the other two buildings, building A, and that's for the delivery. That's quite a distance to deliver to the Taco Bell. What's to stop them from delivering a little closer than that? When I don't know what deliveries go to Taco Bell, but if you've got heavy stuff, usually a truck parks fairly close to the back of a building for a delivery.
Yeah, that is a good question. And I might ask Bruce to jump in if he's more familiar with this, but my understanding is that the loading space in the center here which is also the garbage collection space, is intended that whether it's KFC or Taco Bell or the retail building, the truck would pull in there to get out of the parking area and out of the way of the drive-throughs. And it'd roll up its door or have a side door. What I have seen just by casual observation at some of these restaurants is a bunch of boxes are put down on the concrete space beside that, and they use a dolly and walk it over to the door and get into the building. Sometimes they'll organize those deliveries so they're outside of busy hours, through the night or early in the morning, those kinds of things. But that would be my understanding. I don't think the drive-through itself is large enough to accommodate the truck to potentially go behind the building, and there are no doors shown on the Taco Bell at the back of the building. Oh, there is one, but I don't think that's intended as a loading door. I guess the other scenario is that, and Bruce, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they would come around the back of the building to that back door with the cart, kind of the hand cart with the boxes. I don't know if you have anything to add, Bruce.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you, and through you, Mr. Chairman. That's correct. The loading and garbage area is intended to be shared. It's an efficient location that allows for the ability to serve both buildings. And yes, the trucks would pull in there, and then they would be offloaded, and the goods would be transported in either direction to either restaurant or to the retail buildings. One thing to consider, the delivery trucks wouldn't be able to use the drive-through if that was ever contemplated by a driver looking for a shortcut. There is a height restriction usually, and there'll be a bar above the drive-through. So the truck couldn't pull in there. But yes, we'd be relying on, as Steve said, through observation, the standard delivery protocol where they offload and then walk the materials or cart the materials to each restaurant.
Okay.
Member Wagner.
Thank you so much. This, in my opinion, is a disaster waiting to happen. I have no problem with pretty much any of the requirements here or the requests, except the fact of the 6 meter in the aisle. As you know, Member Gouchardy already mentioned, we're going to hopefully have not everybody trying to cut through, but there are going to be people who are going to cut through. You can guarantee it. And then we have a entrance and exit right beside the entrance to a drive-through. So now you're going to have the potential where you have a lineup happening in that drive-through. That's going to extend potentially beyond the 3 parking spaces that are there that Mr. Gouchardy already brought up. So blocking in those people who are using those spots, and then not facilitating free flow movement of those who are entering and exiting from that entrance off of 124. So reducing now as well the aisle another, which is 3-ish feet. And then further down from that, still reducing, a substantial amount because it's 6.1 or 6.2. We're going to see a backup. We definitely are. There's going to be issues with people because cars are larger. We have trucks and SUVs and things of that nature, especially being a rural urban setting. And I am very much concerned with the entrance of that KFC drive-through being so close to the entrance and exits onto 124. I'm assuming that exit/entrance is as large as it possibly can be, because that is another concern with me with regards to what we see at Wigglesworth Plaza, where it is almost impossible to have 2 cars entering and exiting that area at the same time. Somebody usually has to hold back because that turn radius off of the drive-through for Tim Hortons, when you get to that point, is pretty darn tight. I did voice my concerns about that when we were looking at Colonel Phillips, and thank goodness we oversized that driveway because it was the only entrance and exit available at that plaza. and it seems to be working okay over there. But I don't remember the size. So that's a concern for me as well, is that both entrance and exits have to be as large as they possibly can be in order to facilitate people coming in and out. I'm also concerned with what Member Bonato mentioned with regards to the delivery and loading zone. I understand that, you know, we need to get them out of the way, but I can almost guarantee you, and I'm hoping that this won't happen, but they're just going to pull up right in front of the restaurant. They're going to unload, they're going to do it as quickly as they can potentially, but they are going to pull up in front of the restaurant. Now, whether they do that, like you said, after hours, early morning, late nights, so the traffic is less, it would, you know, obviously be better. But people nowadays, as much as, you know, we would love to say that they will do what is requested of them, or what we think will be the right thing to do, there's some lazy people out there, and they just want to unload and offload as quickly as possible. They do not want to lug their stuff all the way across a snow or icy filled walkway to deliver the product. So that does concern me as well. And yeah, I think my biggest concern though is that entrance and exit to the drive-through and the 6 meter setback for the aisle. In my opinion, I don't think the KFC drive-through should be as part of this development at all. I think you should have created the building A and made it maybe a little bit bigger, so that facilitated you more retail space to offer to people, and you can supplement your income there. But if you can't facilitate proper you know, laneways, driveways, parking, and things of that nature with multiple buildings on a lot, then you shouldn't do it. It just, that's my opinion. But you know, cramming things in for the sake of cramming things in isn't you know, going to be beneficial for the people who now need to use that area. So I don't know, Steve, is there any way at all to maintain at least a 7 meter aisle by reducing curb or something? MTO gives us 14. We obviously can't negotiate with them to reduce that, I'm assuming, like you said, because of the potential for highway widening. But I don't know if there's a way to reduce that little spot where the walkway walks up. I mean, I guess you said something about the rampage there, so you need a certain amount of space there as well, so it's not too steep. But yeah, this I am very, very concerned with this development.
Through the chair to Member Wagner. So I mentioned that, you know, nothing physically was specifically proposed for, you know, traffic calming or to dissuade the shortcutting, but and I, by no means am I a traffic engineer, but what I have been seeing in more areas where they are trying to reduce and slow the volume of traffic through areas where high-speed traffic is not wanted or shortcutting is not wanted, and you really only want the traffic in the area that is needed to go there for the staff who work there, for the people who are visiting the site, using the drive-through, etc. The wider and more generous you make things, the more likely you are going to experience that shortcutting and that fast volume of traffic. So narrowing, one of the methods that is used, for example, in local road design to discourage that shortcutting and so forth, is to do curb bump outs, make the lanes narrower, cause people to slow down. You'll even see those signs and obstructions in the middle of the road that are put in because people will be more cautious if they have to go through a narrow area and don't want to hit anything, right? So my concern with making everything wider would be we would actually doing something that would promote some of the concerns that have been raised to actually happen. Sharp turns is another way. So having to come into a site and quickly make another short turn is better than, you know, having a straight run through the site. And certainly if you're coming in off of 124, you're not going to be moving too fast because you got to decide pretty quickly, am I going in the drive-through? Am I parking in one of those 3 spaces, or am I heading south to the bigger parking area? So I think all of that helps to calm things. If this was a sticking point with the committee, certainly that 6 meter portion could be widened, but it would mean that the planting strip would have to be further reduced from 3 down to 2 if you wanted the full 7 meters. So that's just a little bit less space for snow
Yeah.
storage. It's shifting the curb depression a little bit to the east. You can't widen it on the other side because the curbing is out that far to protect the parking areas and make sure that they're the same length as the parking areas. And I do like the fact that at the southeast corner of the building, there's a nice, larger area for pedestrians to be without being on the surface of where the vehicles are, that they're up, a tier on the raised curb. So those are the considerations. The south side is trickier because the only way to make the 6.12 meters 7 meters is if a reduction of the parking space length was allowed, or the sidewalk were reduced in front of the building, which is already kind of at the minimum, or the building itself was smaller. But we've explored all of those options with the applicant, and this tenant is either going to come or not, depending on whether that building can be large enough for their template. I don't know if you don't mind, Chair Mills, maybe I'll refer to the applicant again, who may have a little bit more to add to that. Bruce, did you have anything else?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, and through you, Mr. Chairman. These are all great comments, Councillor. First, I'll say, on my casual observation of a KFC drive-through, it's not like a Tim Hortons drive-through. From what I've seen, you never see, cars stacking or overflowing a drive-through area. I think that they'll be coming in quite quickly and leaving. The comment about traffic calming and the cut-through, I'm duly noting this, and I think what we're going to do is take this back and consider and speak with our traffic and transportation consultants to see if there is a solution there or some options that we could look at without increasing the aisle. Because I do agree with what Steve said. I think it's important that we make it not desirable as a cut through. You almost want to provide a disincentive for people to do that. Through the narrower aisle width. And with respect to the loading area, it will be a designated loading area with signage. It'll be very clearly marked. You're correct, though. We may have the odd one off where that is a situation, just like any other plaza. But given its location, and I think once deliveries become more familiar with the site, we'd hope that they correctly use the site as it's intended to function. But all very good comments, and I will take them back and look at them more closely.
Thank you.
Just as an observation, and I mean, I certainly understand the concern that's been raised by Member Guichardi and Member Wagner about the potential of motorists using this as a shortcut pass through to avoid the controlled intersection. But just thinking about it, I mean, that property is sitting vacant now. And anecdotally, I can't think of a time, to be quite honest, that I've seen motorists using it as a shortcut now. I mean, it's wide open. If people were inclined to do that, I think we'd probably be seeing that right now when there aren't any cars parked in there. I mean, it's a wide open thoroughfare if people wanted to use it. And I do think, Steve, that was an interesting point. I hadn't considered that, but the fact that it does narrow at that 1 point to 6 meters might actually provide a disincentive for motorists looking to do that. If they sort of look at a bit of a pinch point in the parking lot, they may realize that they're better served just to wait and go through the intersection as they're supposed to. But in terms of moving forward, Bruce, if you want to go back and give that some additional thought, Steve, what would your suggestion be in terms of process then for this evening?
So definitely looking at that more closely, like if the variance were approved tonight, then that would kind of lock it in terms of the planting strip and that one section of driveway or parking aisle. So one of the options available to the committee in any of these meetings is to defer. And just to fully be transparent about the appeal rights, that decision itself doesn't trigger a right of appeal by the applicant, but there is a timeline by which decision is supposed to be made under the Planning Act, and we're at that timeline now. They only, I think the Planning Act only provides 30 days, and we're at about 34 or thereabouts. But I haven't seen any suggestions that the applicant intends to do that. They are working with us, and you know, a deferral would give us the opportunity to take this back, see if we can rework a couple of things, or come up with further information from the reports that we do have, because there is quite an exhaustive traffic report that supports this as well. And what it shines a light on is where the traffic movements are happening relative to the site. So for example, I'm not sure that there's a large volume of traffic coming south on 124 to turn right on 89. It's, at least by comparison to the other traffic movements at that intersection, that may not be one of the larger ones. So that would be my thought on that. Bruce, I don't know if you have any comments with respect to that, the notion of a deferral and bringing back more information.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it would be my preference to proceed tonight, since the variances largely consider minimums. I think through the site plan approval application, Steve and I and our consultants can continue to work on these comments that we've heard tonight. We did look at the comments received already, and we're very confident that we can address those. And it would be my approach to look at all comments received tonight and through the commenting process and in the site plan approval application to look at them holistically, to see what improvements we can make through the site plan application.
Okay.
I'll leave that up to the committee.
Okay. I have member Sample and then member Bernardo.
Yeah, so I agree with Councillor Land and Guicciardi and Councillor Wagner and Mayor Mills about all the comments that were given. I think a lot of the stuff that we were talked about can be held accountable through the site plan when we get to that phase of it. But I think personally, with those restrictions in there that are there with the narrowing and that, you're going to deter traffic. Deliveries, I've seen deliveries happen at other locations and they're mostly off hours anyways, so especially when the restaurants aren't open, other than the fact of stocking and restocking of stuff. So I'm okay to move forward with it myself, with the minor variances that they've asked for, and then manage stuff through the site plan.
Okay, thank you. Member Bernardo?
If Councillors, member Samples prepared to move it, I'm prepared to second it and move forward.
Okay. Jennifer?
You unmute.
Sorry, can't hear you. I think what you're probably going to say is that there are some public members who are signed on that may want to provide comment.
Can you hear me now?
Still can't hear you. Yeah, there we go.
Now you can?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. I just wanted to remind you, Chair Mills, that we do have a member of the public logged in that we should ask.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from the committee members before I open it up to members of the public? No. Okay. All right. Members of the public, I see that is it Randa?
Yes.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Start my video. Thank you. All right. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the Committee of Adjustment. My name is Randa James, and for the record, that is Randa, R-A-N-D-A, James, J-A-M-E-S. My address is 132 First Avenue East in Shelburne. As you know, well, we all know why we're all here. So I won't go into any specifics of that because we've already addressed that. Although I will speak about the individual requests a little later. With all due respect, my opinion is simply that the developer of this site needs to do better. Committee members, you need to ask yourselves, where is the value to the community in this development? In my opinion, the proposal is an overdevelopment of the site for profit and provides limited amenity to the residents of this community. I'm asking the members of the committee to refuse the applications and send a clear message to the developer that he needs to redesign the site, redesign the site plan as well, at least to meet the minimum requirements of the applicable land use bylaws. In other words, do better. The zoning bylaw identifies minimum standards for good reason. Anything less than a minimum standard compromises the integrity of the site and the proposal in general. A well-designed site should be able to adequately provide the minimum requirements, and if these minimums are not met, it's a clear indicator that the site is being overdeveloped. In my opinion, the proposed site plan clearly shows where choices have been made to either reduce development costs or to increase the gross floor area of the retail building, or both, resulting in unnecessary, undesirable aspects of the site plan. It would be my recommendation that the developer and his consultants be asked to redesign the site to meet the minimum requirements of the zoning bylaw where applicable, and to improve or remove some of the less desirable aspects of their proposed site plan. Now that you know my opinion, I want to assure you that I am not just some little old lady with too much time on her hands. I have to speak to my credibility in order for you to understand that what I'm saying is serious. I've recently retired from a 40-year plus career as an exclusively municipally employed land use planner and landscape architect. I've worked in 5 different provinces of this great country, and in a range and size types of municipalities. I have extensive and diverse experience in the land development industry, and I'm here to share some of my experience with you in hopes that you will be in a better position to understand the full implications of the application that we have before us today. I live here in Shelburne, and I want to see my home community thrive. But I currently see signs of a downtown that is dying, where storefronts are less often retail-based and more often office-based. This is an indicator to me that the more auto-centric development, like this application, that gets approved in this town, the more quickly the downtown will degrade and slip further towards dysfunction. This should be a huge concern for the members of this committee. I believe the site context and principally the site design must be fully understood in order to determine whether an inability to meet minimum standards is an indicator of development choices that compromise good site planning principles, which create undesirable site conditions or a result of uncontrolled conditions. Truly, the devil is in the details. In relation to the specific minor variances that relief is being requested for, I have the following comments. In relation to relief of the number of required parking spaces, as we are all aware, 46 are what are required and 42 spaces are what is being proposed. So a reduction of 4 parking spaces seems minor, but is it really? The developer's consultant has provided a parking assessment that used 5 sites for comparison. And it appears to me that all of the locations are in more urban, densely populated areas with populations much higher than the town of Shelburne. So I question the accuracy of a comparison of this nature. Surely, with some minor site plan adjustments, potentially including a reduction in the gross floor area of the retail building, making the retail building freestanding, relocating the Taco Bell stacking lane and reducing the number of stacking spaces, thereby providing a more appropriately sized development for this site and provide greater opportunity to meet the minimum required parking standard. The next item, reduction to the minimum landscape open space. Required to be a minimum 3 meters wide and proposed 2.3 meters. As a result of lack of coordination between the proposed site plan and the proposed landscape plan, a landscape strip located between the two drive-throughs, the landscape strip located between the two drive-throughs, although shown as fully planted on the landscape plan, is not shown on the site plan, although I understand that's now been corrected. Minor adjustments to the site plan could make it possible to achieve the required minimum standards for landscape open space here. Also, I would note that the MTO setback is a common condition shared by the majority of all properties that front onto Main Street, so cannot be used as a cause for relief from the minimum landscape open space requirement for this site. In relation to the reduction in width of a landscape strip adjoining a public road, the requirement is 3 meters and they're proposing 2.3. The location of this reduced landscape strip is beside an aisle proposed to be reduced from 7 to 6 meters. Both of these reductions in this location, which are also adjacent to the main vehicular access point from County Road 124, creates an area of multiple conflicts for vehicles who have too many options for turning into different directions, while adding to this confusion pedestrian crossings to further distract vehicle drivers. This request for reduction in the width of the landscape strip in conjunction with a reduced aisle, close proximity to a major access point to the site, the conflict created by multiple turning options for vehicles traveling in both directions, and the inclusion of pedestrian crossings create an unsafe condition for both pedestrians and drivers. For safety reasons, a redesign of this area should be required in order to improve the overall access to and function of the various components and reduce conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians. In relation to the reduction to the minimum parking aisle width, the requirement of 7 meters proposed to be 6 meters in one location and 6.12 in a second location. In every municipality that I have worked in, and that's in 5 provinces, and in most other municipalities, 7.0 meters is the standard aisle width, and one that authorities are often loath to reduce because it is seen as a potential safety issue to do so. In every municipality, we've seen the trend towards increased ownership of larger and larger trucks, multi-purpose vehicles, and sports utility vehicles, among others. This trend only increases the safety-related concerns associated with any reduction in a minimum aisle width. The location of the aisle proposed to be reduced from 7 meters to 6 meters is located beside the landscape strip referred to above or previously. As stated before, both of these reductions in this location, which is also adjacent to the main vehicular access point from County Road 124, creates an area of multiple conflicts for vehicles with too many options, and pedestrian crossings which further distract vehicle drivers. This request for a reduced aisle width in conjunction with the reduction in the width of the landscape strip, close proximity to conflict areas, again creates what I would call an unsafe condition and should be seriously looked at before pedestrians or vehicles end up damaged, potentially beyond repair. Again, I would say that for safety reasons, a redesign of this area should be required in order to improve the overall access to and function of the various components and reduce conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians. Again, the MTO setback is a common condition that really has no impact or cause for relief from an aisle width requirement. In closing, I would urge the committee to refuse all 4 requests for reduction to the minimum requirements of the zoning bylaw, and request that the developer and his consultants do better. Redesign the site with a retail building of a gross floor area and building configuration more suitable to the site. If this is done, the site development could meet or exceed all of the applicable minimum standards for the town zoning bylaw. Why would we not want all of our minimum standards met? They are minimum standards. At this point, I rest my peace, and I'm willing to answer any questions or respond to any comments that the members of the Committee of Adjustment may have for me at this time. And I would also like to say that I look forward to any future opportunities to provide comment on any land use development proposals or issues that arise within the town of Shelburne. Thank you for your attention and consideration of my comments.
Thanks, Brenda. Steve or Bruce, did you want to provide any comment on the concerns that were raised?
Thank you for all those comments, and I hope you received a response from Jenna of our office to the other written comments that you made. If not, you should see that soon. I did want to just highlight here that there's a lot more information in the site plan application. The basic colored site plan is kind of a very simple illustration. It maybe doesn't do it justice in terms of the level of design effort that's been put into this. Attached to my report, you will see that the detailed landscape plan is included, and there's quite a bit on there in that every kind of square inch of the property is programmed not just for the essential things, but for some nice add-ons to try and make it as people friendly as possible. So there's outdoor seating areas, there's umbrellas, there's generous wide concrete pedestrian movement areas, patio space. There's lots of plantings to try and buffer some of those spaces from the drive-through and so forth. One of the things that was considered was whether all of the landscaping should just be around the edge of the property or whether having some green in the middle was a good idea. And in general, we've been trying to introduce some smaller islands of green space into these developments as well to create shade and other benefits. And there is it's a fairly narrow strip, but there is a strip between the 2 drive-through aisle where that would be planted. And then there's the almost 50 feet of green space at the front. As I say, there's no timeline if and when that's ever going to happen in terms of a highway widening. Normally for this type of development, you wouldn't see 50 feet of green space in front of it. That's quite a generous landscaped area, and that's in addition to the boulevard space that already exists within the right-of-way. Similarly, on 124, yes, it's a narrow strip within the site, but there's already a fairly wide boulevard there. So it has to be taken in context that way. It's a car-dominated corner. These are the types of tenants that are drawn to these busy intersections. There's a high volume of people who go to cottages and travel throughout the year through town that are looking for this kind of thing. Again, I'm not a traffic engineer, but I've been to this type of establishment on some of the busiest roads in the largest urban centers. And I do not see some of these fears realized. I've been in the middle of a Saturday, I've pulled into a KFC parking lot on Homer Watson Boulevard in Waterloo region, one of the busiest arterials in the region. I was the only car in the whole lot. They don't line up 24/7 like some of this is suggesting. You can see that yourselves when you visit and compare things like the McDonald's, the Starbucks, the Tim Hortons. They're all a bit different in terms of the volumes that you see. And delivery service that these restaurants provide, where you can just go on, skip the dishes or whatever and get the food delivered to your home, that I would say is mitigating some of the on-site parking needs as well. In reference, and I don't want to go too long here, but in reference to the parking study that was done. So there was a first draft of that, and we reviewed that, and we did send it back to the applicant because we were concerned that these examples that were being used were from 2 large urban areas that had maybe transit access or other considerations that would mitigate parking requirements. And that's why we asked the applicant to include places like Orangeville and examples that are more similar to Shelburne. Yes, Orangeville's bigger than Shelburne, but you can expect similar private vehicle reliance there as you can in Shelburne without having transit options. And even the examples that were used in the larger urban centers, those are in locations where transit isn't a big component of the ride share. And then locally, we compared this with the existing plazas and the parking ratios provided there. And as I mentioned, this is actually providing a larger parking space standard than the Summerhill Plaza in the north end. And I haven't heard any comments about the 13 or 14 commercial units there creating parking problems. If they haven't made their way to me, but that's to Tim Hortons. It's a busy site. It's on the highway. And as far as I know, the parking ratio is working just fine there. So I'll pause there because there's a lot to talk about here, but I just wanted to give you those initial thoughts in terms of response to some of the questions.
Okay, thanks. Bruce, did you want to add anything?
No, I would just echo what Steve said, and through you, Mr. Chairman, these minor variances are informed by really comprehensive technical studies and reports. The proxy studies done through the transportation and parking studies, there was a total of 5 sites: Orangeville, Milton, Mississauga, and another one. The supply being provided, it accounts for almost 92% of what's required. I would also say that the other 3 variances relating to landscaping, the parking aisle, and the planting strip, it's only for certain areas. It's not throughout the entire site. In most areas, the zoning bylaw is met. Very important comments that you made, but I just wanted to point that out again. And then with the landscape, if we include the MTO setback area, where it's actually an oversupply of landscaping, it brings the landscape total up to 30%. But as we're planning for the future and an indefinite time period, we're preparing for the potential eventuality. We don't know when that will be, to accommodate for that widening, if it ever happens. So in the meantime, we're going to have an oversupply of landscape. The turning movement diagrams provided for in the various studies, they've demonstrated how large trucks can navigate through the site. And by extension, that would mean SUVs and pickup trucks, as you commented on. So there's really no maneuvering issue that we've identified. And in all of the reports and studies that I've read, no safety concerns have been identified either. So, but again, very, very important comments you've raised, and I'll continue. My commitment is to continue to look at all of these comments we've heard tonight through our site plan approval application.
Okay. I noticed that there are some other members from the public that are logged on. I think most of them are for the regular council agenda. Is there anybody else who's on here that wants to ask a question or provide a comment on this particular matter? Okay, I don't see anybody. All right, so with that, back to the committee, based upon the information that we've received and the comments and questions that we've heard. As always, we have essentially three options. We could approve the application, which is what's recommended. We could deny it, or we could defer it. The recommendation from our planner is that we approve it based upon the conditions that have been specified. Is there anybody willing to make a motion? Member Sample?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to move that.
To approve?
To approve, yes.
Okay.
I'd say I would second it.
Okay. All right.
And I would ask.
So there is a motion. Sorry?
I would ask for a recorded vote.
Okay, so there is a motion that's been moved and seconded. And it reads as follows. After considering the application, the committee is satisfied that the request is minor in nature, desirable for the appropriate and continued use of the subject property, and maintains the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw and official plan. The application is approved subject to the following conditions. Number one, that the relief from zoning bylaw number 38-2007 is only for the following. And I'm not going to read these in exhaustive detail, but A is to permit a reduction to the required parking spaces from 46 to 42, to provide relief to permit a reduction to the minimum driveway aisle width from 7 meters to 6 meters, relief to permit a reduction in the minimum planting strip width from 3 meters to 2.3 meters, only along the east lot line, relief to permit a reduction to the minimum required landscaped open space from 15% to 9%, and relief to permit a retaining wall having a maximum height of 1.5 meters to be located along the north lot line rather than in the setback. Number two, that the owner shall obtain approval of a site plan from the town of Shelburne for the proposed development. Number three, that the owner shall obtain required approvals from the Ministry of Transportation for Ontario. And number four, that the owner shall obtain the required building permits. So recorded vote has been requested. So Madam Clerk, I will turn it over to you. Can't hear you again.
Now?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Sorry, I'm having problems with my audio, so. Okay, a recorded vote has been requested. When I call your name, please indicate yes or no. Member Hall?
Yes.
Member Bernardo?
Yes.
Member Fegan?
Yes.
Member Gushardi? No? Okay. Member Sample?
Yes.
Member Wagner?
No.
And Chair Mills?
Yes.
Yes. So the vote passes. It carries.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you to the applicants and members of the public who provided some comments as well. So that concludes the matters listed under our Committee of Adjustment agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Moved by Member Sample, seconded by Member Gushardi. All in favor? That's carried. All right. Before we jump into the regular council agenda, why don't we just take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll reconvene at 8 o'clock to call our regular council